Hi everyone, my name is Matt Williams. I am the Access Fellow at Jesus College at the University of Oxford, and I'm also a political scientist, and I'm going to be talking to you today about why politicians don't do more to tackle climate change. So that's the question we've got ahead of us today, and I'll be talking for about 15 minutes. But if you want to get in touch with me afterwards to find out more about this topic or anything else to do with universities, then do feel free to contact me at matthew.williams@jesus.ox.ac.uk. So why don't politicians do more to tackle climate change? Well, let's dive into it. Well, first of all, a little bit of background. Politicians often don't do much about long-term problems because they don't necessarily have the correct resources or the time horizons or the incentives to do something about those very long-term, very intractable problems. So it may be easy to just blame them and say, well, they're fools and they should do more. And if I was in charge, I'd do better. But you need to have a degree of empathy to suggest, actually, this is a really difficult problem. And there are some analogies, there's some other policy spaces where problems have been anticipated sometimes decades in advance, but still it was so difficult to do something about it. So let's take pensions as an example. Old age pensions were provided by the British state just before the First World War. And for decades, people could see that a pensions crisis was coming down the tracks because it's fairly straightforward to notice the country's getting older and older. The working age population is not necessarily going to keep up with that. So the amount of money you have to pay for all of these increasing number of pensioners is going to diminish. So everyone knew that was going to happen. It didn't mean they could do anything about it. It's a bit like sort of like a zombie or slowly walking towards the edge of a cliff. And you know you shouldn't walk over the cliff, but it's so difficult to know what to do about it because you know it's going to cause so much pain. And as politicians have relatively short time horizons, they're just thinking, what's going to happen at the next election? They're not necessarily incentivized to think decades in advance. But tackling climate change is one of those multi-generational problems where they could be punished for trying to do something quite difficult at this time point, even if it might have a benefit way in the future. So that's one of the issues for politicians. Their time horizons are much more circumscribed as a result of democracy. But to be fair, autocrats aren't any better at tackling climate change either. Healthcare and social care are also other examples where it's been spoken about by policy experts for absolutely yonks that there were systematic problems with those policies. And politicians have had good intentions to do something about it. But these problems are so multifaceted, so complex, and changing the system would lead to considerable pain that it's very difficult for them to just turn a switch and suddenly say, oh, look, I'll fix it. So one thing you need to start with is a degree of empathy with politicians, not just dismiss them as charlatans, as fools or knaves, because that's relatively easy, but it's also intellectually lazy, I would say. So let's nonetheless get back to the question and talk about why politicians don't do more to tackle climate change. Well, my first piece of advice, whenever you're confronted with a question, is to unleash your inner toddler. And by that, I mean, pick it apart like an angry toddler asking lots and lots of subsidiary questions. So when I speak to my own toddler, Teddy, he's 3 years old, if we are chatting about something, he'll say, well, why is that? And then when I give him an answer, he'll say, yeah, but why is that? And he'll ask more and more questions, and we'll just start going down this sort of deep rabbit hole of question upon question upon question. But that's very healthy. And in fact, that's the way that you ought to think as well about any of the problems you're confronting in your life. It's a very good mindset, highly perceptive, not credulous. He's not going to take a particular answer at face value. He's going to really interrogate it. And that's the way to think. So the thinking skills of a toddler is basically the same as the thinking skills of an Oxford student and academic. So let's unleash our toddler. I'll show you what I mean specifically. If we deconstruct the question, we need to think like a toddler would think. Well, so first of all, have politicians failed to tackle climate change? Is that in fact an accurate statement? Do they not tackle climate change? Is the underlying assumption of this question in any sense reasonable? So that might be the first sort of level of a toddler, a deconstructive analysis of the question. But we can go even deeper than that. Which politicians are we talking about here? Is it the specific members who form the executive branch? In other words, those who govern the country? Or are we talking about lawmakers, legislators? Are they also partly contributing? But then you can go even deeper than that. What are politicians? Are politicians just a sort of reflection of public mood? Are they essentially like a sort of a puppet that we are manipulating, the voters, and therefore whatever they're thinking and doing is merely reflective of our own inadequacies as citizens? So when we say politicians are not tackling climate change, do we really mean, really, that we are not tackling climate change sufficiently? You know, why do we have politicians? They are there to take the difficult decisions that communally we would fail to. So we've delegated responsibility to them to take difficult decisions. But it seems on this particular matter, we punish them when they take quite difficult decisions, because then we might vote them out of office. Now, of course, you could argue that actually there is a systematic distance between politicians and the people that they represent, because there may be a sort of elitism in politics, such that political representatives are elite and they're sort of far removed from the general population, and therefore they don't represent us terribly well. But you need to have a really good think about when you say something like politicians don't do enough for climate change. Well, that could be because the population don't want to do enough about climate change, really. Okay, but you know, and again, the toddler can go even further in his or her interrogation of this question. So when we say, why don't politicians do more, what do we mean? Do more than whom? Do more about what? You know, how can you compare? If you say, why don't you do more, you have in mind some sort of yardstick about what ought to be done. But if that yardstick is left unuttered, then how can you possibly know what it means to do more? What sort of metrics of active and inactive tackling of climate change might we use? Well, here's a study from the University of Yale, which describes the top 10 best and the top 10 worst countries with regards to tackling climate change. Now, this is probably going to be largely intuitive insofar as there are Scandinavian countries at the top of the pile and some poorer developing countries at the bottom of the pile. You might be somewhat surprised to see the United States of America in the top 10, but you know, they actually plow a lot of investment into climate change. But again, this gets to the point of, well, how have you put this table together? How do you measure activity when it comes to climate change? Is it the amount of money invested in green technologies that will pay off in the future? Is it the amount of carbon offsetting done? Well, of course, the problem with carbon offsetting is that you're basically still contributing to climate change, but you're offsetting it to another country to deal with. So you might manufacture dirty things in another country, you still import the products, so you're still basically the cause of the climate change, it's just not in your territory. That's what a lot of countries do. So you've got to be very careful with how you sort of blithely say, oh, well, we should do more, we should be more like Denmark. Well, maybe we should, but you know, you've got to be careful with those sorts of statements. Anyway, let's get to actually trying to answer this question and start with the political economy of climate change. So when we say politicians don't do enough about climate change, well, we need to start with thinking about what are the costs and what are the benefits about tackling climate change. And we can start with just the essential point of material costs. So one of the fairly classic reasons why politicians haven't historically engaged with climate change is because it was expensive to do so. The technologies were not cheap. There was insufficient labor force training in how to utilize those technologies. And so the cost of utilizing cleaner energy and renewable energy was outweighed the benefits that were seen to be accruing, especially as the benefits were so long in the distance. The benefits might be something like, we do this so as not to face apocalypse in sort of 50 years' time. It's very difficult for a politician to do that sort of calculation. But this digs deeper. So when we talk about the costs and the benefits, we need to really grapple with what the costs mean on an individual and a collective basis. So let's start with individual rationality. Why do particular individuals on a micro level choose to or not to do anything about climate change? Well, this could be enlightened with some consideration of game theory. Game theory is a study in maths and economics which looks about how people behave as if they're playing a game. And a very famous example of this is the prisoner's dilemma. Do two prisoners who've been accused of conspiracy in a crime snitch on each other or cooperate with each other? If you set up the incentives in a certain way, such that the two prisoners can't communicate with each other, the likelihood is that the most rational thing will be for them both to defect and both snitch on each other. And quite often, the way that societies work has a similar problem, is that we don't have the institutions that can help us pool our shared interests. And so we tend to just defect. In other words, we tend to punish each other. So rather than cooperating, we defect. And another similar game theory comes from the tragedy of the commons, which is this idea that if you have common resources that everyone has access to, like the oceans, like pasture land that could be common land, people will just exploit it. And if you're the only one mug that doesn't exploit it, you'll just lose out. Your family will go hungry. Everyone else will spoil the resource. They'll deplete it. And you'll just have been wearing a hair shirt. And that's a stupid thing to do. So, I mean, obviously it's not literally a stupid thing to do, but the point of game theory is that if you're the one person that through ideology or good intentions refuses to exploit the situation, then you punish yourself. And that's part of the problem with individual rationality and why often individuals don't do more to tackle climate change, because they would be hurting themselves for the sake of everyone else. And so when we extrapolate from the individual to the collective, in other words, from you and me to the whole of society and groups, you get a problem of collective action. Why don't more groups of people do more to tackle climate change? And again, if we talk about costs and benefits, it can really help us understand this. Part of the problem with tackling climate change is that the costs are very concentrated, but the benefits are highly diffuse. Imagine you and a group of friends go to a beach and you tidy it up and you clean the local environment. You have borne that cost yourselves. You've had to take the time and effort to do that, but everyone benefits from a cleaner beach. So the costs are concentrated, the benefits are dispersed. So what in fact is your incentive to clean the beach? Many would argue you were foolish to do so because I'm going to enjoy the cleaner beach and you've taken the time to go out and do it, you mug. Now, of course, you might take other benefits from it. You might think, well, I feel good about cleaning the beach, and who cares if other people benefit? That's fine. But, economists don't necessarily think in this way. So conversely, those sort of companies that make a lot of money by exploiting fossil fuels, they have highly dispersed costs and very concentrated benefits. So, for example, if a company wants to start fracking for oil in parts of Lancashire, the costs of that activity will be highly dispersed. In other words, they'll make the environment a little bit more dirty, but it'll be a little bit more dirty for everyone. So it's very difficult to find people that are going to be that easily displeased by it. I mean, you'll find some, but they'll be so widely dispersed it won't cause a huge trouble for you. And the benefits in terms of making money are all concentrated in that company. So they're highly incentivized to act together and exploit that fracking opportunity, whereas other groups are not incentivized to do something to clean it up again. So that's one of the arguments, especially from economists, as to why more isn't done in order to tackle climate change. Another crucial issue that I've raised several times now is discounting the future. When it comes to climate change, we're talking about a multi-generational, multifaceted problem. And so we need to try and work out how you can solve such a problem by discounting present benefits for future gains. And those future gains are indeterminate. So it could even be that by wearing a hair shirt and doing lots of climate mitigation work now, what we predict as the worst case scenario won't come to pass. But then, of course, that can reinforce the arguments of some deniers that, well, it was never going to happen in the first place. So you've got to have this awkward and difficult conversation along the lines of, we need to basically make our lives a little less comfortable now so that our children and our grandchildren won't face absolute existential peril. And that's very difficult. And it's very easy for individual countries or individual units to defect, just like the prisoners in the prisoner's dilemma, just like the tragedy of the commons, just like the logic of collective action. It just takes one United States of America to say, we're not going to bother with that. We don't want to bear this burden. You do it, fine. And we'll benefit from it because you'll be cleaning up all the environment for us. You can't exclude us from that benefit, but we're not going to do it. We're not fools. So it's very difficult to obtain that degree of consensus. And it's also, there's a questions about intergenerational justice. If we're working this hard on our grandchildren's behalf, well, what do we get out of that, except for a slightly sort of morally superior air about ourselves? So there are questions about justice as well. So if we go back to the question and we ask, why don't politicians do more to tackle climate change? Well, first of all, it's a really difficult problem. It's multifaceted and multi-generational. There are lots of reasons why engaging in climate change might be seen as self-defeating and self-punishing. Actually, that's becoming less true because the technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So as of 2016, for example, solar power became cheaper than exploiting fossil fuels for developing electricity. And this is a game changer. This is going to change the calculations because all of a sudden you're a mug if you don't use renewable energies. Now it's the cheapest way forward. So things could really shift very quickly as a result of that shift in emphasis. But anyway, what might you do differently? If you were Prime Minister for a day, what sort of things might you do in order to really shift our minds on this? Will you change the narrative? Will you change the ideology? Will you change the institutions? Will you change the money and move the money around? What would you do differently? It's always easy to say, if only I was in charge, it would be better, but be specific. What concretely would you do? Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been interesting, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks so much. Bye.
Hello, I'm Lucas Watts. I study PB at Warren College, Oxford. This building, yeah. Before that, I went to Gartholwg and very level did history, English, maths, and then for ASs chemistry and further maths. And yeah, suppose I'm just going to give you, I don't know, a bit of an idea of what my life's like studying PPE year, what the course is like, sort of structure of it, what you can expect. First year, structure of the course. So you start in first year and you do all 3 subjects, and it's done from like no prior knowledge, which is really nice because I turned up being a bit like, they expected me to know loads about politics and philosophy, and they're not, because I'd never studied any of the 3 before, and it was really fine. Like first year's just designed to like get everyone up to scratch, give everyone like a solid basis so that you can go into second and third year like to do the deeper stuff with, I don't know, a bit of a like grounding. Then you go into second year and you can drop one of the 3. So I dropped econ, but not that many people keep doing all 3. Seems a bit mad to me to do all 3, but people do it, so if that's your thing, the option's open to you. Also, within the subject themselves, there's loads of options, and so you can very much like tailor it to your interests. There's probably like 20 politics options, 20 philosophy options, maybe 10 economics options. So like now I do completely different stuff from my friends who also do PPE. Like there's some of us who don't share any modules at all. Like moral story being, you very much tailor it to your interests. It's like, it's really broad, it's really nice and flexible. Like I don't think anything is like, I don't think you have to do anything in second year. Like there are some, like you have to choose like from a set of core options, but like none of those, nothing in particular is like absolutely necessary that you do, which I just think is really nice. So I don't know, I suppose what's most useful is I can like say something about what I do, what my life looks like. So with philosophy, first I did ethics, which is like the classic what's right, basically. We also kind of had essays on what does it mean for something to be right, on how we should judge if someone's life is going well for them, stuff like that. Then also did some wacky stuff in metaphysics, where it was writing essays on like whether time exists, whether we can know that the world just like isn't all happening inside our brains and that there's no like real external world out there. Again, classic philosophy, like, you know. Then also did a few like, I don't know, things a bit more off-piece maybe. So did aesthetics, which is like philosophy of art, philosophy of criticism. Wrote some essays on what art is, wrote one on how music expresses emotion, also wrote a really fun one on basically all about an Eddie Murphy stand-up set. I just really didn't like, and what that like taught us philosophically. Then I now do Indian philosophy this term, so I look at like sort of a mix of all those ideas, but in Buddhism and Hinduism. Philosophy generally is just like a really fun subject to do if you just like sort of conceptual arguments, basically. Like it's very sort of puzzle-like, and I always think, I don't know, it's a bit like maths with words sometimes as well, and like you have to be like very logical and everything has to like fit in quite nicely. So if you like that sort of thing, then you just definitely will like philosophy. It's also really useful in teaching you how to like write and think really precisely. Like just, I suppose, just like send me the point of the subject. Like of anything I've done, I think that's the one that's made me like better at essay writing. There's also, I think, maybe a few surprising things in there too. Like I think when you think about PPE, you're not normally thinking about like essays on art and Buddhism, I suppose. But like goes to show again like how broad it is. Like if what you want is like hardline empirical politics, where, you know, analysing, I don't know, countries' relationships with each other, we're analysing like courts and constitutions and stuff, and you want to do like hardline economics, it's all still there. But like I think it's useful to see like it is a lot broader than that, and there's like a lot more on offer. You can also do a mix of those two things, is what's really nice about it. You can do some hardline politics and you can write an essay about, I don't know, Buddhist theories of the self. So then in politics I did political sociology, which is like classic, like how does class affect your politics, what's nationalism all about, how does nationalism arise, wrote an essay on like different types of power and how we can sort of prove them, if we can prove like sort of like covert power. On that actually, I wrote an essay on conspiracy theories as well, which is one of the more fun essays again I wrote. Then I did political theory, questions like what's justice, is it ever right to react to injustice with violence, some stuff on feminism, some stuff on critical race theory, so that's all really fun. Then did sociological theory, another one where you get to write funky essays. So we spent one tutorial like talking for about half an hour about this pub fight, this like YouTube video of a pub fight outside a pub in Margate, and like what it told us about face-to-face interaction, the way that breaks down, like how we're like so emotionally attached to like, I don't know, social interaction. Also I wrote some essays on how social norms like come to exist, how they disappear. That was quite fun. That was a really fun paper actually. And then now this term I do politics in South Asia, so looking at politics basically in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So I was writing an essay this week about environmentalism in India, and how people come to care about the environment. Next week is on the politics of nuclear weapons and how it's affected the relationship between India and Pakistan. So again, that, I mean, more like classic politics stuff there. In terms of like what a normal week looks like, that's just difficult to say, to be honest. It's like very hectic and changes a lot. I've gone maybe 4 to maybe like 7 lectures a week, and I now go to most of them, to be fair. But like the core of the course is like tutorials and reading lists and essays. So I have 2 of them a week. So tutorials are like class 2 of your tutor. I mean, I'm not sure you've been told this yet. If you have, then you're going to be told again. You have class 2 tutor. It's like you and then like 1 or 2 others, sometimes you on your own, and you just like chat about the essay you wrote that week and like the topic you wrote around more generally and like what you've been reading about. So for each of them you write an essay, and so I have 2 of them a week, 2 essays a week, because I do 2 papers, 2 options like every term. And so you have, I mean that sounds like quite a lot, I think, and because you have like a separate reading list, I probably read like, I don't know, maybe 100 pages, I don't know, sometimes way more, sometimes a bit less, pages a week for like each essay, which sounds like loads, I know, and it is a lot of work, but you get used to it and you fit it in, you manage to like, you just can have quite a nice time, quite a nice balance. It's not like 3 years in the library. Like last year, as well as doing 2 essays a week, I was also playing 2 football games a week. I did 3 hours of Russian a week, and was also like going out like 2-3 times a week. Like it's not like you sacrifice your life to sit in the library 24/7. I've had, I don't know, a really fun time here, to be fair. What else have I got to say? It all ends this year, which is sad. And it's examined by 8 exams at the end of your 3rd year. So I had no exams last year, which would have been really nice if Corona hadn't happened, because I'd have had a nice chilled out summer, but Corona did happen, and what can you do? So your entire degree just is decided by like these 8 exams at the end of your 3rd year, which, I don't know, it's a bit stressful, a bit scary, but it's quite nice in a way, because it just means that like when you do sit your exams, you're like at your peak in a way, and like, I don't know, you will have done all your learning, rather than like doing something at the end of the 2nd year where you like aren't as good at the subject. I quite like the idea that I'll be like at my best when I have to sit them. But if that's not your thing, then probably take that into consideration. I think, I mean, if you've not guessed, I just really like the flexibility of it and how broad it is. It's worth having a look, I think, on the like course website, on like the uni website, to see a bit more about it. Also, like if you're a bit worried that you're like only now just thinking of applying, or like you've listened to this and thought, oh no, that does sound interesting, then like it's really not too late. I fully like settled on doing PB like a few weeks before the deadline, like 3-4 weeks maybe. And before that, like, thought I was going to do, like, I don't know, English or maths or engineering or, like, all sorts. So it's really not, like, you don't need to, like, have been interested and involved in your local, I don't know, political party from, like, the age of 13. Like, I think if you fancy it, just, like, read a book or pirate a book or watch a YouTube video or a podcast or, like, a documentary about, I don't know, some of these sort of subjects, and just, like, see what you think. Particularly YouTube videos are always really helpful, and podcasts, because no one wants to read. But yeah, I really recommend, like, giving it a serious think. I've really enjoyed my time here, and that's what I was going to say. That the fact you have 2 tutorials a week just means you get loads of feedback, and you do get a lot better. And that's because I was going to say one of my favorite things about you is the tutorials, because you do just, like, get a chat with a world expert, which is obviously paying, and yeah, you just do feel yourself getting better, because, like, if you write 2 essays a week and you get feedback on those, like, you can't not, like, start to improve. And so if you're, like, interested in, like, getting better at these things, like, definitely consider applying if you're interested in them, because it does, like, I don't know, does make quite a mad difference, and it has been really enjoyable. So I think that's all from me. I hope I've not left anything really important out. And yeah, I suppose I'll hand you back to the host to explain what's next. So, ta-ra.
Nawr cofiwch y bydd y dosbarthiadau meistr na ar gof a chadw i chi eto. Over the last 2 days, you've had the opportunity to attend 4 different masterclasses, but if you wish to see more, the series of masterclass content will be available to you to view after the conference is finished. Gobeithio chi gael rhagflas buddiol am y pynciau amrywiol. The conference has hopefully helped give you a feel for what it might be like to study the different subjects at university level. Amser I fyfyrio eto nawr. It's now time to use the next 15 minutes to reflect on all the masterclasses you've seen over the 2 days and build on the masterclass reflection resources you used yesterday. Os mae heddi chi'n ymuno â ni, if you're just joining us today, these will have been sent to you previously or can be downloaded in the lobby area. Ac felly, ewch i'r lobby i'w lawrlwytho. Reflect upon which masterclass you enjoyed most. Beth sy'n mynd â'ch bryd? Which big ideas and research would you like to be a part of investigating when you go to university? Yna, nôl i'r brif stafell I wybod mwy am heno. I'll see you back in the main room at 3:35 for some final instructions before this evening.